Okay, welcome to this edition of the European Society of Criminology Oral History project. My name is Ugelvik. I'm here with Professor Sveinung Sandberg of the University of Oslo, and we are here to talk about you, Sveinung. I have decided to structure the talk or the conversation around three main questions, if that's okay. I think we should just jump right into the first one, and it's a big one. It's why criminology?
It's a good question. For me personally, it was a little bit of a coincidence. So I was studying sociology, and I was particularly interested in social movements, specializing in anti-globalization movement at that time. So political sociology, and a little bit of sociology of organization and labor sociology, and then I kind of liked it at the university and wanted to stay, so I was teaching a little bit and picking up small jobs here and there, but I couldn't manage to get a real job like within that field of research. So just by coincidence, I met the professor who needed someone to interview at-risk youths in the city center about sexuality. And I took that job and I did those interviews, and that was a space, an area with a lot of drug users. So the one thing took the other, and a couple of months later I was interviewing young people who were doing drugs in that area, and finally I got a PhD where I did ethnographic work with street drug dealers. And at that point I had to start to read criminology, and little by little I took a PhD in sociology and I did a postdoc in sociology, but I was kind of gradually getting more and more into criminology. But I still have the problem sometimes that I haven't read all the classics. So when I was teaching in the criminology department, because I finally got a job there as an associate professor, I had to read the classics at the same time as I taught them to the students. Some of it
a week before.
But so that was my way into a little bit of a coincidence, but I'm really glad my life took that direction. I mean, I was following the money at some point, but I'm really happy that I ended up in criminology now.
So as a student, you started out as a student at the University of Bergen, right?
Yeah.
And there's no criminology department. There are no criminologists, basically.
No, that's right.
Was criminology even on your radar at that point? Had you heard about criminology as a discipline?
No, I mean, it's hard to go back and think, but I think I would have to say no. I didn't have an interest in crime or drugs or anything. I was very interested in politics, so I studied political science and political movements. But criminology, no. I mean, if you had asked me when I was 20 years old, I probably would have managed to come up with some kind of answer, but I didn't know it as a discipline, no.
And then you describe sort of a series of happy coincidences, right? That leads you into the field from the side almost, right? You get this job at the University of Oslo Criminology Department, which is the only university criminology department in Norway. It's a traditional department, has these well-known scholars. Thomas Mathisen, Nils Christie were both there at the time when you started. So you're, as a sociologist coming from the outside, in what ways were you aware of the difference between the tradition that you came from and what you were heading into?
Very little in the beginning. So part of the stuff that I hadn't read was Nils Christie and Thomas Mathisen. So I realized I had to read up really fast in the beginning there, but I was thrown into it. So within a couple of months, I kind of realized that the big changes the department had gone through, like from being more politically oriented, more nationally oriented, I would say, to becoming more international and less political, more research oriented, and I also realized that had been some kind of like a conflict. But for me, I felt like an outsider, so I was just looking at it from the outside. But I identified very much with a new generation of criminologists in Oslo with being internationally oriented, working in teams, publishing in English, and also with, of course, having a strong political commitment and believing in the importance of some of these causes, but not in letting that overshadow the research or dictate the research. So trying to kind of have a very empirical or data-driven research agenda, I think.
And so to be clear, you felt that aligned you with the new generation and contrasted you with the older generation?
Yeah, that was the impression I got. Yeah, I think for many of the old ones, I kind of symbolized the new, the new criminology in Oslo. Yeah.
And you mentioned the word conflict. Was that a problem in the beginning?
For me, it wasn't a problem because I came from the outside, but I could see that it had been a problem for some people in the department for a while. But I guess that's the thing. I think that's normal. And I think in one way it's good too that people should try to challenge the established traditions. And I tell my students now that, I mean, if you just continue doing what I do, nothing is going to move forward. And there are no like right or wrong directions, of course, with some modifications. But the important thing is that people dare to challenge what is established. So I try to push my students into trying to confront the professors, trying to come up with new theories, introduce new frameworks, trying to criticize us, I guess. Yeah, we're a professor in the same department. So I wish we could have more of that, like students coming up and criticizing your work, like really. I think that would be good for the department. So, I mean, of course, conflicts can be bad, but I think in academia they're also good. I mean, as long as you manage to not make them too personal, I guess.
So that's super interesting. I mean, so you claim that you say that you're trying to get the students involved. In that sense, you try to get them to ask critical questions. Are you successful often, do you think?
I'm more disappointed than successful, I think, and especially in like introducing new theories, because when I started, I did a lot of work with Bourdieu and Foucault and all these classics that our generations was very attached to, and I tried to push them to say, well, you should introduce something new, you should come up with other stuff, it doesn't matter what it is, just try to do something new. And especially in terms of theory development, I wish they would have been more daring and more individualistic, or more having some kind of clear theoretical ideas of where they want to go.
Or even unclear ones, but different.
Yeah, different. Introducing new theories. I don't see too much of that. No. But I think they're good at introducing new topics, though. So, with like the development in crime on the internet or new drugs that are introduced. So I think they're very good at picking up on new empirical topics, but maybe in terms of theoretical developments, it could have been more in our department at least. Yeah.
Okay. No, I agree. How do you go about accomplishing something like that, though? I mean, you're asking them, I guess, to use theory that you yourself do not know, that to surprise you, right? To choose stuff that feels original to you, but it's a tough thing to ask of them, I guess, because obviously you've spent years in the field, you read a lot of stuff, and you still want them to, these younger people, getting into the field to surprise you, right?
Yeah, it is difficult because they have to pick something that we don't teach them in our theory courses. Yeah. But I think we did
Don't
that.
Listen to us, do something else.
Yeah, I think we did that though. I mean, I was reading like Law and Move and Fairclaw, and I was reading a lot of stuff that was not on my reading list. And the whole postmodern thing that was also very big, Baudrillard and Lyotard, and nothing of that was taught when I was studying sociology. So I think that made it more exciting because you kind of felt that you were digging it up yourself in a way. But of course, we were part of an international movement where people were doing that. So I think it's of course difficult. But as soon as we start teach, it kind of loses that thing where it comes from below and comes from the students. And
yeah, so I totally agree. I also remember reading a lot of stuff almost because it was not on the reading list. So that made it feel sort of more important in a sense. Yes, you have to prepare to do the exam, and so you have to stay on top of the reading list, but look at all this different stuff, right? Is it obviously academia or higher education has changed quite a lot. Today we give the students more exams, don't we? In terms of what we demand of them, coursework, etc. Perhaps we take up more of their time. They have less time to do that sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe it's our fault.
Yeah.
And we want them to finish within a certain time limit, and we cut our basic degree from 6 years to 5 years. So maybe, but I still think it's possible. I mean, it's in their hands, and it should be in their hands, because as soon as we start doing it for them, it doesn't work anymore.
No. Okay. Going back to you coming from sociology, moving into criminology, I mean, depending on one's definition, some people would say that criminology is part of sociology. It's very sort of closely related. Much of the theory is the same. I guess sociologists on average spend more time reading classics than we make our students do, than we did perhaps, I don't know. But so there are differences, but they're not huge, right? You came to France.
Yeah, I came to a very sociological criminology department. So I agree in terms of how you think about society, how you think about research. It was very close. It was basically just not knowing the local traditions, not knowing some of the international classics. But in terms of how to do research, it's a very qualitative department, so that also felt like coming home in a way. I agree that it's very similar, and I would also argue for my sociological friends that criminology, in many ways, at least in a way that we're doing it, is just a branch of sociology, studying crime.
Controversial. So do you still feel coming to the back then? I think you did, but coming to the field as an outsider, do you still feel like the new kid on the block sometimes, or have you now sort of settled into criminologist identity?
Yeah, I think I must say I have, and also my topics have been very actor oriented. So in many ways, I'm doing more criminology than many in the department who do immigration research or studying the system in different ways. So yeah, at this point I feel very much like a criminologist, definitely.
Yeah, what you're alluding to, I guess, is that if you look at sort of the classic division between deviance and social control, our department historically has, and in the present as well, is very sort of social control heavy. And we have done quite little when it comes to studying deviance. And you're one of the examples of people who actually do study crime, study deviance, right?
Yeah. So I feel like I'm addressing one of the major questions of criminology, like why do people commit crime?
That's an excellent segue into the next major question that I wanted to ask you, that is, why narratives?
Yeah, because now I'm fronting, or I have been since 2010, this framework of narrative criminology. And as I mentioned earlier, when I started my PhD, it's very much with Bourdieu, and we had this concept of street capital and Bourdieusian criminology, which is another of my main interests. And I've been more and more going in the direction of narrative criminology. And I think, I don't know, it's hard. I mean, how far back do you want to go? My my mother is a minister, so I went to church every Sunday and I listened to stories. My grandparents are movie makers. They basically made their living out of telling stories too.
Yeah.
So I think there is kind of a family tradition in being interested in narratives. But more recently it was, I think it came from my interest in post-structuralism and postmodernism and turn to language. So I worked with discourse analysis for a long time, and then I realized the more interviews I did, if it was with drug users or youths who were into risk sexuality or whatever, I would always remember a couple of stories from each interview, like days after, weeks after. I couldn't retell the whole interview or the facts and stuff. Then I always had to go back to check, but the stories always stuck to me. And then I thought, okay, either this is me or this is like a human, basic human capacity that we remember better in stories. And if we do that, or in narratives, if we do that, that must mean that these are important because they stick to our minds. So I kind of turned a little bit away from discourse analysis that I thought was getting too technical, too complicated, too detailed. I very much admire the linguists who do discourse analysis, but I kind of wanted to get more to the raw power of storytelling. And I think with narrative analysis is a better framework for doing that, both theoretically and empirically. So, like looking at, trying to see what kind of stories is it that people really want to tell, what kind of stories get them excited, what kind of stories drive them to do crime. So that's how we define narrative criminology, basically, that what are the stories that either forces people to do crime or inspire them to do crime or motivate them, or what kind of stories is it that pull them away from crime. So we try to ask this very big criminological question: why do people commit crime and why do they stop committing crimes, by addressing which kind of stories drives them either the one way or the other.
Yeah. So now you go straight to one of the core questions, one of the important, difficult questions in narrative criminology, I think, and one of the more controversial issues, I guess, as well, because obviously you could do an old school constructivist analysis and ask how narratives are used to for identity making. I mean, how people talk themselves, in a sense, into existence through their stories, etc. Right? And that would be interesting in itself. And that's been done forever, almost, right?
Yeah.
But then you want to do something more.
Yeah.
You want to say that, okay, they do. So narratives are important when it comes to self-image and culture and the way we perceive the world, but it also shapes our actions, right?
Yeah.
There's the causal element.
Yeah.
And you got a question about this yesterday.
Yeah, I get those questions all the time.
Yeah. And I got the feeling that it sort of annoyed you a little bit. I don't know if that's true, but that's my impression. Because, like you said, I'm sure you get the question all the time. But I don't really blame the people who ask those questions. I mean, I'm sure it's annoying to you because you get them so often. But I mean, there's this separate ambition, right? The ambition of wanting to say something more, you want to connect the narratives and the actions, the stories and the crimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your response yesterday was, yeah, I mean, this is done in all constructivist research.
Yeah, and I do think that's true. I mean, there is a tradition in psychology for like coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, and stuff like that. But if you look at the big constructivist work, the major point is that these discourses create society, right? And that's a cause, I mean, not a cause you can measure But it is a course in a kind of broader sense of a course. So I think it's underlying all, and that's the point of constructivism in the first place. I think that we believe that we can say something about how the world looked like based on language, based on discourses, based on narratives. But I agree, maybe particularly in criminology, the emphasis has been more on coping mechanisms and the kind of looking back, what the stories do looking back. But even if you go back to neutralization techniques, that's also forward pointing. I mean, they don't use the word cause, but the idea is that when people neutralize things, they are able to do it again.
Yeah.
So even neutralization, even Saxon-Matza was really doing some kind of at least speculating about the causes of crime. So I think we build on that tradition in terms of how language constitute society and constitute crime, and just add on more sophisticated theories, more elaborate by basically stealing stuff from humanities. Literature studies, linguistics, narrative analysis in sociology has been going on for a much longer time than it has in criminology, so we are inspired by people like Gubern and Holstein, and all of that.
So I agree, but I also think, because the general sort of constructivist point is that the way we perceive the world, the way we talk the world into existence, the way we construct the world together will have effects in the real world, or will have so I mean, take examples such as money or the days of the week, right? They're constructions. Obviously they are. I mean, what else could they be? And that has effect. So if you turn up in Norway at the store on a Sunday and you want to get in, you can't because it's locked. It's a Sunday, and it's obvious to everybody, but it's a social construction. So this sort of almost, it's seemingly random thing that Sunday, etc., and there's a legal framework. It has effects, right? Yeah. But the way in narrative criminology you go into the actions of human beings and the behavior. It's something slightly different
of individuals.
It's something slightly different, because
I can see
what you say is that one type of action, telling a story, has an effect on another type of action or non-action, the committing of a crime or not, right? And that is a more specific, more complicated argument in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah, or at least more specified. I think it's a part of the same, because these bigger changes, these bigger constructions are based on a lot of people acting upon certain dominating discourses and so on. But I do agree that you kind of take it one step down and say, well, if this environment, like I've been studying drug dealers a lot, street drug dealers, and if they go around saying that, well, if people take some of my drugs or they trick me, I will beat them up. So that's the dominating story. Whoever you ask will tell you that story. And then I would say at some point these guys will have to deliver on that story. So in that sense, that story is kind of driving the violence they're committing, because they're creating this culture with these dominating story, who is also super important for their identities. So if they want to maintain some kind of coherency in their life, they will have to deliver on these stories of being able to beat someone up who hustles them or challenges them or disrespects them. So I think that's like one example of how stories very concretely drive action. I think if they had been in an environment with different stories or different interpretation, and I've studied drug dealing in the other context, where people would say stuff like, if I beat someone up, the police comes. If I'm just dealing drugs, the police never notices, because it's the violence they see, because people end up in hospitals and so on. And then those kind of story makes people not commit violence. So even though there are market mechanisms as well, like the absence of formal sanctions, you can't call the police, that it's part of the explanation of drug market violence, for example. I think these cultures of storytellings are also just as important or even more important, just because you can see the variety. Yeah.
So do you think when you get these questions, these annoying questions about causality, do you think people who ask them often expect a certain, I mean, do they come from a tradition where it's seen as possible to isolate causal factors, right? And to find the causal factor in a sense. But narrative criminology and constructivism, etc., you're coming from a position where it's much more common, and we talk about a range of causal factors that are intertwined, but you can't really separate one of them, etc. So they have an expectation that you can't really meet, right?
And that's fine, I think, because if they mean causality in a very strict sense, that it should be measurable, it should be possible to isolate it from other causal factors, I agree that it's impossible to say that a story is a causal factor in that sense. But in a broader sense, and for people with kind of more qualitative approach, more ethnographic approach maybe, we're already used to kind of making arguments about what leads to what. I mean, often we try to avoid the word cause, but in sense of we make explanations, right? We make links, we make, and in that tradition, I think it's very easy and almost commonsensical to say that stories are one of these factors that influences where people end up in their life. And this is not only the case for the people I've been studying. This is the case for academics, for everyone, right? We go around, we tell stories, we try to be a coherent self, and we act on these stories all the time.
Yeah, but in narrative criminology, you, or perhaps I should say, we have chosen to use that term cause, right? To talk about causality, and it signals a certain ambition, I guess.
And also an attempt to kind of build down the bridges between constructivist criminology and realist criminology, I hope. Because I think there should be more communication across. I can't really believe that we disagree that much. So by picking up a little bit of the vocabulary, of course, it's provocative for some, but it's also a way of saying, well, we're not that kind of constructivist who would just say, everything is relative, anything can happen, there is no truth out there. It's just all up in the air. It's a very postmodern approach. So we're kind of trying to signal that we're doing something. We're also interested in what leads people to commit crimes and what the reasons for crime are. We're just looking at other factors, and we acknowledge that we are looking at some very complex factors, but we hope we still have something to bring to the table.
Okay, so the fact that you want to include different perspectives and you want to go beyond the boundaries, the traditional boundaries of constructivism, etc., and sort of see if there are links to other traditions, right? That, I think, is a good way of moving into the final of the three questions that I wanted to ask, and that is, why Latin America?
Yeah, so the last couple of years I've been running a big project in Latin America that we call Crimla, crime in Latin America, and it's a very theoretically it's a very specific project trying to combine traditional life course criminology with life history research. So from the start we aim to kind of overcome this opposition between realism and constructivism and see if there are things to learn both ways. But when you ask how I got into it, it wasn't because of my interest in Latin America or anything like that, but it was because my wife got a job in Mexico, and I took my 4 kids and was driving them back and forth to school and making sure they had a good life. And then I knew we were supposed to be there for 4 years. And the first year I was writing up some old stuff from another project on extremism and radicalization, and then it just slowly came to me, well, you're a criminologist, you're in Mexico City, you should take advantage somehow of the context that you're in. So I started to drink coffee with Mexican criminologists, just Googling a little bit, checking with people I knew if they had people they thought would be interested in meeting me, and then I met a very nice and helpful professor at CIDE, Gustavo Fondevilla, and I got an office there, and we started working on some of his data. He had some interviews that he didn't had time to analyze, and I did some papers on those with him and some other people, and we applied for money to do this huge studies in 7 different Latin American countries. So yeah, it was very, in the same way as my way into criminology, it was very coincidental that I ended up with this big Latin American project. But it's, now that I'm in it, it's the most fascinating thing I've done so far.
So again, with these coincidences, this sort of this randomness to your career, I mean, I guess life for everybody is a series of coincidences, but some people seem to plan ahead more than others, and it seems to me that your career has to quite a large extent been random, in the sense that stuff happened and then you just jump on and you let your interest drive you, and then all of a sudden you're there, so you have to figure out. I mean, do you agree? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I agree, and then since my wife is in the foreign ministry, it's a little bit the way I've had to do it, because we have moved around a lot. So and at some point I needed money, right? So I needed a job. So I think what's coincidental and what I can jump on is topics, like empirical topics. I think I could study anything and I would be interested in it if I just spent a little bit of time. But what's more consistent maybe is the theory part, because I have been staying quite close to this interest in language in different ways throughout my career. Also in my work with Bordeaux, I try to combine it with language studies and so on. So that has been more consistent, and also in terms of methods. Although we're trying to do we have done one survey, and maybe we will do more. I have stayed very close to this kind of qualitative and ethnographic tradition throughout my career. So yeah, a little bit of coincidence and a little bit of consistency as well, hopefully.
You said that the Krimla project is a big project. I don't think the word big does it justice, to be honest. I mean, yesterday when I watched you go through sort of the methodology and the scale of it, it's impressive, and it's almost a bit daunting, to be honest. I mean, you have 64,000 pages of transcribed interviews, right? It's ridiculous. Did you? I mean, was this planned? Did it just happen? How can you cope with the shared weight of the material?
When I discussed this with my colleague in Mexico, my suggestion was, let's try to get some funding for a big study in Mexico. We can do different prisons, we can do life history interviews, can be cool. We're here, right? And he said, no, let's do it in Latin America. And he had all these contexts. So, I mean, alone I wouldn't have managed to set this stuff up, because I don't have the context. And for me it would have been too big. But since he was so excited about it, I just thought, okay, let's go. And the plan was 6 countries, and then we added a 7th one when we found some extra money in the budget. So it was supposed to replicate some stuff he had done with survey research in some of the same countries, some of the same prisons, but in the end it was too hard to combine. So now it stands alone as a qualitative project. And we often get the question, well, what's the difference between that country and that country? And the design we have is more to look for the kind of commonalities across Latin America, and then it also makes sense to have all these different countries to see if, okay, yeah, we know there are a lot of differences, but is there also something that runs through all this, runs through the life stories, life courses of all these prisoners in these different Latin American countries. So I think for answering those big research question, it's a good design. It would have been hard to do that just in Mexico or just in another country. And it also makes it possible for, like, we have small research teams in each country to do their own stuff. So everyone owns their own data. If you do an interview, you own the data. So it's not like we're controlling everything. So we have a lot of interesting, like, case-specific studies too, based on one country, one set of interviews there. But so we have that kind of traditional one case studies, but we also have the opportunity to make these cross-country comparisons, or try to see if some of these phenomena have this more overarching characteristics.
And it sounds good, and it's obviously impressive, the scale of the project, but it must create some problems as well, some issues, because as the project manager, you're in the middle of everything, right? And you're used to analyzing narratives and to look really closely into the nitty-gritty detail of specific narratives, etc. And how do you manage? How can you do your analysis with? I mean, I guess you could say that you could look. The data set is so huge now, so whatever you want to look for, it's there probably, in a sense. But
no, and a couple of papers we've done already. We just pick like a couple of interviews. We did one music paper with David Goyes, where we look at some prisoners who are particularly into music, and we do a very traditional narrative analysis of these interviews. We do another also with David, study of paramilitaries, people who move in and out of paramilitary and organized crime, and look at how their life courses changes as they move through this organization. So that's very much based on just a small sample of the big sample. So we always have that opportunity to pick out someone, but if we want to work on a bigger sample, which we have started to do now. In the beginning we did the smaller papers because we hadn't coded everything, and at some point we hadn't done all the interviews either, and we wanted to start writing. We follow the coding very much, so we have 64,000 pages of transcribed interviews, but we have coded it, so we have very detailed small codes, and we can take out one code and look at, say, how does cell phones work in prisons in Latin America. And if you look at the code like that, it would be like 500 pages or 1,000 pages, and then it's doable. And then you have all these stories, very particular, about how mobile phones organize their life. So I think that's the way to move forward if you want to analyze the whole data set. Then you can't go on an individual level anymore. You can't like follow, but you can look at tendencies in the overall data by following the codes. And these codes would be anything from like your relationship to your mom, your upbringing, your first time you used drugs, first time you committed crime, first time you got a job, when you quit school. So we have codes for all of this, and then I think we get very detailed and nuanced data on very particular phenomena. So I think it is possible to work in that way, although I do realize we kind of have too much data. It will be impossible to do justice to that kind of data set. We have an enormous amount of important and exciting stories and stuff we should have written about that we won't be able to write about. So in one way that's a problem, but in the same way, if we want to say something general about, say, mobile phones in prisons, or people's relationship to their kids, or why they committed their first crime, or how it took place, we do need this kind of numbers to be sure that we kind of are looking at a more general tendency and not only something very particular. So we are touching upon, of course it's not a representative sample or anything like that, but we are touching upon this idea that we think that we get a sense of what's common. And in that way it's a good design, I think. So that's what we get, and what we can't deliver on is like writing on everything that's important or should have been written upon from this data set.
Okay, so in a sense you want to do traditional qualitative analysis where you go deep into specific stories, etc. But because you have all this data, you can also say something about what is, you said, common, normal, average.
Yeah.
In a sense, right? So you have more sort of quant type questions almost.
You get a certain feeling that you have an idea of what's common. Like to give you one example, in a paper I'm working on with Martin Di Marco and Gustavo Fondavilla, now we look at children. So what happens when people get children? And we know from the Western Northern Life Course criminological literature that that's a very protective factor. People commit less crime when they get children. But then we got a sense from our data, and we could check it because we have codes on it, that it seems that it works a little bit in a different way in Latin America, in the sense that people just get another mouth to feed, right? So they have to get some income also to support their child, and that can increase their involvement in crime. And we found some other mechanisms too that it looked like it was less of a protective factor, maybe even a risk factor to get a child, especially if you got it at an early age, which many do in Latin America. So I think that's one example of how we kind of got that feeling. We could use the code, we could see it, and now we even did a survey in a Colombian prison where we asked about this with children. Of course, there's self-perception, but then we got it confirmed also with quantitative data that it seems as if children is less of a protective factor in Latin America. So I think it's kind of, you go from some interview, you get an idea, you go to broader qualitative data set, you get a stronger sense of it, you're more sure about this finding, and then in the end, if you really want to check it as a causal factor, I guess you will have to do the survey to get the kind of proof.
So here you're combining an interest in stories, narratives, more sort of constructivist factors with more structural, objective stuff. This was very much the case with your presentation yesterday and David Goya's presentation, if you look at them combined yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So it's about narratives, it's also about the labor market.
Yeah.
Is this a way of expanding narrative criminology? I mean, it hasn't been totally blind to structures, that's not what I'm saying, but you're sort of, you seem to take these more objective things very seriously in the project as well.
Yeah, instead of just stating that these are important factors that we have to take into account, we kind of try to go in detail on it and say, well, how, in what way, what structures, how. But Jennifer Fleetwood has done this from the start in narrative criminology. So her book, for example, is very much based on analyzing stories, but also analyzing the objective structure around it that produces the narrative. So I agree that for me personally, I've kind of been more into the nitty-gritty of the narrative storytelling when I've done those analyses. But in the narrative criminology environment, there have been people who have done that from the start. But yeah, I think it's particularly suiting for a study in Latin America, kind of, with such a big data, with such a big topic, it would be a little bit awkward just to study storytelling. I mean, you want to say something about how this storytelling relates to poverty, to security problems, to organized crime in that.
I'm afraid we are running out of time. I have to ask you before we stop to look sort of into the crystal ball a little bit and say something about where you go from here. What are your plans, your ideas. I mean, your plans aren't worth anything because your career is so random. But if you have to guess,
it depends on where my wife goes and gets posted next time. No, I hope to, like, we just started this project of combining life course and life history, so there's a lot of work left to do there. So I definitely want to do that. I also want to go beyond Latin America and try to make a comparative study, because the Latin America one isn't comparative in that sense, but
it's not big enough.
No, like, I want to do a global study with a comparative design, so we can say, okay, what's the difference in these life courses in countries in Asia, in Africa, Latin America, Europe? What's the difference in the stories people tell in this context? So just from the start, have a very comparative design. I think that would be a cool study. A lot of work, but if it's possible, I would like to do that. And of course, I also have other smaller plans that are good too.
So again, with the ambitions. Good luck with everything, and thank you for a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for interviewing me, Thomas.